Welcome everyone to Special Need Jungles Talk with Angela Kelly. Angela is a mental health expert and regularly writes for us around issues to do with mental health and children with special educational needs and disabilities. And today she has kindly offered to answer some of your questions about how your children are coping with lockdown and worries about reintegrating them back into school and all other issues like that. So thank you very much, Angela. It's lovely to see you.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So how's lockdown going for you and your family?
It's up and down. We have good days and we have more difficult days. It's there's no one way that it goes really. I find that it's a bit of a melting pot at times, and then other days it's going really swimmingly. We're very lucky because we've got a large outside area, lots of hills and things where we can walk. So if one or other of us needs a bit of time, there's plenty of places to go.
But certainly the feedback seems to be really divided in the Zen community, where some children appear to have really high anxiety levels around the lockdown, and for other children it's been an absolute gift, and all of the anxiety that they previously had going to school has disappeared, and parents are saying that they've got their lovely children back. So it seems to be that you fall into one or other camp.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that children who were profoundly anxious are suddenly not anymore, and those that were not displaying significant anxiety symptoms suddenly are with being at home. And I think it's an interesting mix, because anxiety feeds on the need to know, really, the need to know what's going on. If the brain doesn't know, it makes it up for itself anyway. So for some children, by sticking to the facts and evidence and not having to negotiate such a strict social environment such as school, the anxiety's gone because they've read the information that's out there. There's lots of helpful information out there that's based on fact, and it's settled anxiety. Whereas for other children, they've needed that social interaction and engagement, and therefore the unknown and the more opinion-based information then takes over and becomes a source of anxiety. I mean, ultimately, it's having a pandemic is one of the worst things that can happen, isn't it? It's cut us all off from each other. So anxiety realizes that this is the very worst, and I've still survived it.
Do you think that schools could learn something from the measures that have been taken to cope with the pandemic in the way that they support children who perhaps are too anxious to go to school?
I would hope so. I think that there's been a lot of suddenly having to find a way through something for everybody, which for those that have struggled with that already, that have SEN and school refusal, I don't like calling it school refusal, but school phobia, that suddenly realising that schools can do it means that they can continue to do it.
So let's look at the questions that we've received. I mean, it's a lot about anxiety, as you would expect and as you've been mentioning. So somebody's asked, how can I help my teenage autistic son with his anxiety? He's finding infuriating that the parent is actually so calm and is not getting upset themselves.
It might be that what's happening is the calmness of the parent might be exacerbating the anxiety, because he's not being able to read those social signals. He's not able to work out what's going on. It might be that the parent's trying to do too much. Sorry,
he thinks the parent should be anxious.
Yeah, maybe.
About the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then therefore that's unnerving. So it's going to create more anxiety. So it might be that they communicate with each other, find out what's going on. I wonder what is going on for you. Why have you become so anxious? So really opening up the questions, because what I've noticed in my role is that as parents we try to fix things, and actually sometimes we can't fix them. We have to sit with it ourselves.
Certainly sometimes with children who struggle to read social cues, actually verbally expressing the way you're feeling is a better way of communicating. So rather than, so you may appear outwardly calm, but inside there's a whole turmoil of emotions, and actually expressing those verbally to your autistic child is a way for them to understand how you're feeling when they can't perhaps follow facial cues.
Absolutely, because although they might not be understanding the actual facial side of it, their vagal nerve is going to be telling them that there's something amiss, that there's a mismatch of what you're looking like to me and what I'm picking up from you.
The vagal nerve is, just for people who don't know, it's what kind of sparks a fight or flight instinct.
Absolutely, yeah, it is, yeah.
So how do you start that conversation?
I suppose acknowledging that what's happening at the moment isn't working. So by saying, you know, we need to do something differently. I can see that my way of working isn't helping you. What do you need from me? And you don't need to just ask anything else. That's enough.
Yeah, that's a very different way of phrasing it, isn't it? And then what's wrong with you? It's putting the onus on you as a parent, saying, I understand that what I'm doing isn't working. How can I better communicate with you? So it's a subtle difference in the way you address the same issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what
it really is.
What if the child, for example, just says, you know, I don't know, and they cannot find the words to express how they're feeling? Are there some tips that you can offer? So say they're so anxious that they just cannot reach and find those words to start off with.
So you're going to need a lot of reassurance. You're going to need to either verbalise the reassurance, but mostly give them time to say, look, you know, I'm not expecting us to sort this today. Go away, have a think about it. Text me. If it's easier to text me, if finding your words is too difficult, text me, email me, anything. Leave me a voicemail, and I can pick it up later. But so that you're offering that calmness, but that humility at the same time. I know that there's more than one way that we can communicate with each other.
So sometimes if it's difficult to recognize emotions as well, sort of asking a child how they feel physically as well can sometimes, you know, anxiety can express itself as feeling sick or having a headache, or and starting that conversation about sort of helping the child be able to identify their own emotions and how they, you know, they manifest in their bodies. So is it that they clench their hands together, or the muscles are all tense, or, you know, they get a headache them. And then actually that can then start a conversation just on that. So then when a child feels sick, they can say, I feel sick, maybe this is because I feel anxious.
And also reminding them that anxiety is okay. We have to have anxiety to survive.
And we all get anxious. It's a normal part of being human.
And it's the levels of anxiety that some children are reaching that then becomes profound and changes their ability to interact with life.
And also we're all having to find ways of managing that at the moment, aren't we? You know, as adults and children. I know both Tania and I have to go for times without even looking at the news, just to sort of like find our own happy headspace. So we've both kind of sort of like recognised that and had to sort of make changes because of that. And it's the same across the board, whether you've got a child with special educational needs, you know, whether you've got disabilities yourself, we're all having to find our own coping mechanisms, and that can be an open conversation with your child about, actually, you know, I've struggled too, and you know, these are a few of the things I've tried. So it normalises. I
mean, I have to say, I do communicate with my youngest via WhatsApp, because then that gives them the opportunity to answer when they're ready, rather than demanding an answer straight away. So it kind of just takes that, you know, the necessity to reply immediately away, so that they can.
Absolutely.
They don't want to.
And what we tend to do as parents, I don't know whether you two do this, but it's something that I used to do a lot, is I would ask one question and then I would reword that same question in a different way. So I was asking the same thing, but in two very different ways. Now, for a child that's autistic or auditory processing, any sort of delay, that's two demands straight on them. And it's going to create anxiety because they're going to want to get it right. They're going to want to, be able to answer you. But then once the demand is too great, the overwhelm kicks in and the anxiety is taken over.
So you just ask one question and then wait and then ask maybe, do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah. And make sure you say their name first so they know it's you that they're being addressed. And
also I've found that sometimes conversations can't happen while emotions are high because actually the ears have shut off and they've gone into protective mode, and actually waiting for time to pass and then talking about things in past tense where they can be emotionally removed from it is actually the only way to be able to tackle a subject, because you just get nowhere when actually those emotions are quite heightened.
Absolutely. The brain's gone offline. It's a bit like somebody switching off your Wi-Fi system. Nothing's going to go in, so don't try.
On to another question. Do you have any suggestions for getting an autistic child to do their schoolwork at home? I know this is a question that probably plagues many parents, not just of autistic children, but children who perhaps struggle with schoolwork, or even struggle with doing schoolwork at home, because there's a very distinct difference between school and home. So yeah, I'm looking forward to your answer on this one.
Well, I'm not sure there is an easy answer to this one. I think it's trial and error, little and often. Once you know what doesn't work, don't use it. Make sure that you know what your child's type is, because most children I know are what I'd call carrot children. They would work on an incentivised aspect for schoolwork. So, remember when that schoolwork's done, you get to go on your iPad. Don't use if you don't do your schoolwork, you're not getting your iPad back. So they need to know clear set boundaries for doing that. I'm not guaranteeing that they'll still do it if they have, but if you're clear and you're consistent, you're more likely to be successful.
And again, it's around language, isn't it? So it's not a case of you cannot have your iPad until you finish the schoolwork, but you are going to be rewarded with your iPad once the schoolwork has finished. It changes it from a punishment to a reward.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they need to know that if you do discipline them, and one of the disciplines is that a gadget is going to be removed, they need to know in advance so that then it can become more of a choice as to whether they do that behaviour. So if you are completely consistent, you are more likely to be successful, but I can't guarantee it.
So it's being clear about the consequences before it gets to the point where the consequence is going to be implemented. So it's setting those boundaries before you start, and perhaps giving a warning before then the consequence is implemented.
Yeah, because then the child has more responsibility over the decision they make. So, and it might be that you only get them reluctantly doing 10 minutes, but actually sometimes that's enough of a success, because you can build on success, whereas building on failure is far more difficult.
And what about around the environment of sort of the difference between school and home? Because as we mentioned earlier, it could be very difficult for some children being able to do any schoolwork in the home environment. Is it ever helpful to actually sort of set up a certain area of your home that becomes school? Even going to the extent of making a little sign saying, school or something. Would that be beneficial, do you think, for some children?
I think for some families, for sure, yeah, because it gives a boundary again. It gives, a defined working area. And again, it would be trial and error. Sometimes it might be that you need to get school on board to help. See if they'll set up a Zoom meeting with the three of you, or I think it has to be two members of staff.
Yeah, because schools are still responsible for supporting children with
Yeah, absolutely. So, see what suggestions they've got, what they
maybe make contact with the SENCO and ask for tips and making it, of course, I'm guessing making the school aware that there's an issue as well, so there are no repercussions if schoolwork isn't being handed in. But I guess it's also about being kind on yourself. I mean, parents aren't teachers, and the last thing we want is to have desperately unhappy children, because an unhappy child isn't going to learn. So I guess from my point of view, it would be, yes, you know, our children do need to learn, but also, you know, you're a family, and that your mental health of parents and children and siblings is really, really important. And you know, the balance has to be struck.
What has worked for you two? I mean, I'm lucky because my kids are no longer at school, but what has worked for you two?
So some of the things that have been successful is using my son's interests as the driver. So he is particularly interested in things like MAPA, which is a physical restraint thing. Don't ask me why he's interested in it, but he is. So rather than getting him to read the book that they're reading at school, because that creates tension, and I can feel that it creates tension, he reads me 2 pages from a MAPA book.
So I've got 3 very, very different children. So actually I've had to do different things with all of them. So my youngest, he's motivated by getting out of the way. So he gets up early and we get all of the work done, because then he knows he's got the rest of the day to himself without me hassling him, and he doesn't want to drag it. You know, so it's quite hard work, and he needs an awful lot of input and encouragement, and you know, he moans about absolutely everything, but he gets the fact that once it's out of the way, you know, his time is his own, and I will not bug him about how much screen time. He can just knock himself out and play games all day, which is what he's doing, and that's what makes him happy. So that works for him. My middle child is probably the hardest work. She's at mainstream and she's getting a lot of work, and she resents it because it's too much like homework. And so we've actually had to put in a lot more kind of structure and making her sit down with us doing it, because if she's left her own devices, she'll just go on, you know, Instagram and everything she can possibly do to avoid doing it. So actually that's worked for her, is actually kind of saying, no, you will sit with us until it's done, and making her do it, and then she gets the rewards. And for my oldest, I've actually been very, very lucky in the support that he gets from school. They've kept his lessons exactly the same. He's on the autistic spectrum, and that's really, really important for him. So his lessons are exactly the same time with exactly the same people, and they're online. So I'm not being the bad guy making him do it. It is school, you know, that's doing it for him. So actually, we've had to take a different approach for all of the kids. Sometimes it works, sometimes not so much.
That actually leads on to our next question here, is how can I balance the needs of 2 very different children during lockdown and manage my own needs, especially when the children get physical with each other?
It's an interesting, wasn't it? Because physical violence between siblings can be a real upsetter for parents, because they feel they have to intervene, they have to sort it out. Ideally, if you can intervene before it gets to that point, so look at what the flashpoints are. That's the most important, because if you know they're going to get physically violent, then you can watch out for it. So if it gets to the point where they're getting physically violent, it's about keeping everyone safe. So it's intervening for safety reasons, and then perhaps dealing with it afterwards, of asking them as well, you know, what gets you to that point? How does that happen? Because, you know, and be honest with yourself as a parent. You know, it frightens me when I see you behaving like that. The 2 people I love the most are trying to pull each other's hair out, and it's not nice.
It also kind of depends on the ages as well, doesn't it, of the children?
It can do, yeah.
As to how you have that conversation.
Yeah, asking them to come up with their own solutions as well, maybe, before it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just having some ground rules as a family. You know, that one of them is no physical fighting, no hurting each other. If you've got young children, no hurting each other, then, you know, you can broaden it out as the children are a little bit older, so that they know that there's consequences to what they're doing. Try and make the consequences natural.
We
as well.
When my boys were younger, we did actually have a set of house rules that were written down. They were up on the fridge, and they like rules, you know. And they can say, "You are breaking X rule," and so that actually worked for us. And so if they broke a rule, I said, "Well, you know, it's on the fridge. You can go back and read it." And we agreed to these rules before, you know, we went through them, we made them together. So, you know, we need to stick to them so then we can have a peaceful house. And it really did help.
Funny enough, we tried the rules and it had the opposite effect in our house because of the mixture of disabilities. So I've got one child who's absolutely black and white, you follow the rules, and other children who perhaps aren't like that and quite enjoy winding the other one up, and so they would break the rules, and then that would cause a physical fight because they couldn't cope. And actually what worked for us is actually having some separation, so having space, so actually no one was on, you know, people weren't on top of each other all the time, and actually they could just go and chill out. And another thing that I did to try and help the children see how they got in the situation they were was to record it. So I took a video of them as they descended into the argument and then showed it to them, and they were really, really surprised. They didn't realise, I think, the situation that they were getting in, and so then it gave us something to talk about. So, you know, why did you say that, and what did you think the reaction was going to be, and did you mean that, you know, for them to take it in that way, to try and have a discussion, but with something then we could look at analytically, because it's really important for my children, I think, as I said before, not to deal with anything in the emotion, but to then go back and look at analytically, and then everyone can have their say and try and learn from it. It doesn't work brilliantly, but it helped a little bit with them understanding how it got to the place it did. You know, by the time fists are being thrown, it's too late. So
absolutely, you've lost it.
yes. No, just for personal use. Yeah.
So I guess, Angela, maybe what you would say is use what works. You know your own children.
Yeah, get to know them, talk to them as people, and get to know yourself and what triggers you. Because if you're triggered by the build-up of a physical incident because of something that's happened in your own past, which is often what happens, which is often why it's a trigger, is explore it, get to know yourself, and manage your expectations.
Yeah, and also, I guess, being honest about your own feelings to the children. Again, sometimes explicitly saying, you know what, this is making me feel really, really upset, and I'm going to need to go and sit by myself for 5 minutes just so I'm calm. Because I guess the worst thing you can do is to shout at a child to tell them to stop shouting, because then you're modelling the behaviour you're seeing. So actually saying, I feel angry enough to shout right now and I don't want to, so I'm going to go and lock myself in the bathroom for 5 minutes and look at Facebook, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about it. It's that starting that honest conversation again, isn't it? It's so important for parents to recognise that, you know, whatever we see on social media, families aren't perfect, and kids do fight, and, you know, they learn to negotiate and to deal with issues by fighting. It's perfectly natural. Frustrating as it is really, really natural. And it doesn't mean you're failing as a parent at all. It just means that, you know, unfortunately you end up with the skills that you could utilise in the UN from a negotiating point of view, just to try and have a bit of peace and quiet. But if you need to go and lock yourself in the bathroom and spend 5 minutes on Facebook, do it. You know, as long as there's no carving knives.
You're using those I statements rather than you.
Yep. Oh yeah, don't use you, because it's a known way to escalate a situation, because it's accusatory, and if you're using the word you will be almost guaranteed that you'll be met with defensiveness, and if somebody's defending themselves, that it's going to escalate a situation.
And on to another question I think is probably really, really relevant for a lot of our families. Is someone worried about their child being anxious about coronavirus and the possibility of losing a loved one, and how can the parent help them deal with that?
Well, I suppose it's all worries are needing to be talked about. So where does the worry come from? Have they already experienced a loss that they've not able to process? is it that they're reacting to what they've seen on the news? Or is there a very real risk that this is actually going to happen, and therefore a conversation does need to happen?
And again, how do you start that conversation?
Again, using things like I statements, I can see that you're really worried that this might be a reality. What do you need to talk about? What do you need to know? What do you need me to tell you?
I have seen a couple of resources out there actually that have been released about talking to children about coronavirus, some lovely picture books that are out and about for free. And perhaps, Tania, we could find the link to those and post them with this. But yeah, there's some really good, well-written ways of having a conversation with children about coronavirus and the risk to grandparents and loved ones.
Absolutely. And I think there's some specific websites that deal with like bereavement that has it specifically for like mainstream and children with SEN. So you've got that differentiation.
JKP has got a new library, and there is some free downloads on there, and one of them deals with explaining coronavirus to a disabled child. So let's move on. What can I ask from school to support my child who's received no support so far?
I guess you can ask them anything that you want to know the answer to. It's probably as simple as that. Perhaps it's how you do it. It's how you're asking. It's looking at what the relationship has been like. Has there been a relationship breakdown? So therefore you're not wanting to ask for help. And again, then that reflects back to your own feelings. So it's sorting out where those feelings come from, what those barriers are, and how to remove them.
I think it's very difficult at the moment, isn't it? Because obviously it's very difficult for schools to provide, all the support that perhaps they were before for children with SEND. So it's being realistic on one side about what the capabilities is, but also schools have to recognise that they do need to still be putting support in place. So it's reasonable adjustments, I guess, is the term. You need to be approaching the school. I guess that starting the conversation is with what the issues that you're having. So being open about the issues, and then being open to them coming up with creative ways that they can perhaps help. It won't necessarily look like it did before coronavirus, but it's starting the conversation in a positive way, rather than going in saying, I demand that you do this for my child. More of a, look, we're having this issue and we could really do with your support and input.
Yeah, and I think maybe absolutely. Also is knowing what you want before you start that conversation. Kind of sitting down and thinking, okay, what do I think my child would respond to? What do I think from looking, do they need? And then start the conversation on that, because there's no point asking for support if your child cannot actually use it at home. So be guided by what you think your child can actually use.
And even if you don't sort of like know how to support your child, understanding the outcome that you're looking for. So being very, very clear about what it is you're trying to tackle, be it being able to sit still for 20 minutes to do work, or perhaps it's the understanding of the work, whatever it is being very, very clear about what outcome you're trying to achieve, so the school knows what it is, where you're both heading in the same direction.
Absolutely, because there's nothing worse than a miscommunication to create a communication barrier. So by having that clarity, it's really important.
And also, I guess, depending on the age of the child and the child's needs, it's involving the child in that conversation as well, which is quite often a step that's missed out, because the child might have a really good idea about actually things that might help, or at least it might help them sort of like feel more in control of what's going on, by being part of that conversation too.
Absolutely. Children need elements of control, because otherwise how do they learn and develop it? Otherwise they get to 18 and suddenly they've got all this responsibility lumped on them. It's kind of setting them up to fail. So gradually and age appropriate and developmentally appropriate, give them that control.
Moving on to another question. Obviously there's been an awful lot in the news at the moment about children going back to school. which has caused quite a bit of concern within the SEND community for obvious reasons. And so one of the questions we had was how to help their child with reintegration to school. And the parent actually phrased the question as they were very worried about this, which I thought was quite interesting. So I guess you've got the two sides. You've got the parental concern and anxiety, but also the child's, perhaps difficulties reintegrating with school and possible anxiety.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think most of the population are going to be having this as a difficulty, particularly as we reach key transition stages as well. Year sixes are going to be missing out on an awful lot of those endings that are so important to create beginnings. Year two's going to a new school are going to be missing out. So it's about being open about how it's impacting everybody, and then finding out what it is that your child needs. Is it the child that needs reassurance? Is it the parent that needs reassurance? And good communication with the school. That's going to be vital, that it's communicated how it's going to be made effective and safe, so that it reduces those anxieties and concerns.
Yeah, transparency is always key, isn't it? Good communication and transparency is really, really key to reducing anxiety. Yeah, so a parent needs to know how their child's going to be looked after in school, what's going to be happening, how they're going to be kept safe. Some parents, even if their child doesn't go in, or they decide they're not happy the child's going, they're not going to actually get into trouble for it, and absolutely. Their child is still going to have access to education, and because what's right for one child isn't going to be right for all children.
No, absolutely. And knowing that, there's going to be a step-by-step approach and no consequences at this stage of this journey that we're all on.
And again, the communication, so the school understands that, the parent is concerned about the child returning for whatever reason, be it, perhaps anxiety in the child or the parent's own concerns, gives the school the opportunity then to actually support them and help them with that process.
Yeah, and recognising that the teachers possibly are going to be anxious too.
Yeah, definitely.
So moving on to the final question that we've got time for is, my son has been unwell both physically and with depression. He's now unable to help himself and won't leave the house. What can I do to help him?
Ask him what he needs to start with, maybe. So you've got that starting point. Find out where they're at. Why aren't they leaving the house? With regard to the physical ailment, what is that physical ailment? Is it something that they're scared about? Sometimes things, when there's a physical ailment, they get built up into something insurmountable inside, because our heads can be our worst enemy at times. They could, once they're our best friends, great, but intrusive thoughts and misunderstanding situations can put a real barrier in for young people, particularly when accessing GP support. He might be scared of going to the doctors because of coronavirus, might be scared of catching the virus. So explaining things like GP appointments can be done by video call, so that that he knows what all the options are. And then, say, was it an older child?
Yes,
yeah, I think it would apply to any child. I mean, because sometimes I think you don't know what they don't know, and you can make assumptions about what you think they would understand and know, but they don't.
Yeah,
I guess
absolutely.
Also what pops into my mind is that if they're unwell physically and suffering with mental health issues, it's not all on the parent to kind of solve, and actually there is a time to call in professionals and perhaps give the GP a call and explain what's going on, because even with the fear of coronavirus, I know a lot of medical professionals are worried that children aren't being brought in to see them when normally they would be. So I think I'd probably err on the side of caution and say, if this young adult is actually physically unwell and needs some mental health support, that actually there are services out there are still running. They're running in a different way, but they are still there. And it's perhaps, even if it's just a chat to reassure yourself that everything you're doing is right, that there is a time and a place to call in professionals and get some professional input too.
Absolutely. I had an incident with my own young man a few weeks back where he developed a bit of a rash and a sore spot, and he had convinced himself that he had developed sepsis. Now, there was nothing on this planet that I could have said that was going to reassure him. So I popped up, our GP's only up the road, popped up to our GP surgery and spoke to the GP, and she said, you know, tell him he's got nothing to worry about, but if need be, bring him up and I'll talk to him. Came home and it wasn't work. He wasn't going to hear it from me. So we walked up to the GP and she sat him down, 10-minute conversation, and he was absolutely okay. It gave him the reassurance that he needed.
Yeah, sometimes having someone in a position of authority saying it has a completely different effect, doesn't it, than when a parent says it. So
yeah, it was fantastic.
Well, I think that's probably about all we've got time for. I'd just like to say huge thanks to Angela, because I know you're, as well as looking after your own family, you're still working, doing counselling by Zoom. If you need any more clients, I'm sure you might get some at the end of this. Angela is available. She's a professional youth, child and mental health counsellor and our mental health editor as well. So just huge thanks for your time. And we'll look forward to hearing from you again soon, we hope.
Absolutely. No, thank you for this. It's been really enlightening. It's been good.
Thanks a lot, Angela.